When Nick Bauer built a fence, he didn't expect war. But one HOA queen, a can of pepper spray, and a midnight attack would turn his peaceful life into the most outrageous suburban showdown ever. Nick Bauer had always believed that peace wasn't something you found. It was something you built. That belief was why he'd chosen his quiet corner of Colorado, tucked just far enough outside the city to avoid the noise, yet close enough to civilization for a strong cup of coffee and reliable plumbing. His home, a sturdy single-story ranch-style house with a wraparound porch and a backyard that melted into a stretch of open pine, had been his sanctuary for nearly 8 years. He kept to himself, paid his taxes, and grilled a damn fine ribeye every Sunday. What made Nick different wasn't just his impressive collection of power tools or the fact that he'd served 2 tours in the Navy. It was that he deliberately didn't belong to any homeowners association. When Silver Creek Meadows sprouted up across the road 3 years back, complete with identical beige houses and a shiny new HOA charter, they'd tried their best to rope him in. He was sent flyers, newsletters, and even a personalized invitation signed in glitter pen by someone named Karen D. They offered landscaping packages, holiday light competitions, even bulk discounts on mailbox decals. Nick sent them all straight to the shredder. He had nothing against his neighbors. He just didn't want to be told what color his fence should be, what time he could mow his lawn, or how many inches of holiday joy he could display. His property sat adjacent to their development, legally and geographically separate, and he liked it that way. So when spring rolled around and Nick decided to finally replace his aging, weather-beaten fence with a new one, something rustic, rugged, and unmistakably his, he did it the right way. He filed the permits, checked with the city, confirmed property lines. He even handpicked reclaimed wood from a local mill. After weeks of planning, the installation date was set. What Nick didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his simple decision to upgrade a fence would soon become the spark that ignited the wrath of one woman and an HOA with far too much time on its hands. And so, beneath the calm whisper of Colorado wind, the stage was quietly set for war. A war with beige houses and glitter pens. The sound of hammers tapping rhythmically against wooden beams filled the crisp morning air. It was day one of construction, and Nick stood at his kitchen window, sipping hot coffee as he watched the fencing crew mark their progress along the southern edge of his yard. Everything was going smoothly, until it wasn't. At precisely 9:43 a.m., a shrill voice cut through the air like a steak knife through tin foil. "Stop! You can't build that here!" Nick blinked and leaned forward, unsure if he'd misheard. But there she was, stomping across the road in a lemon-yellow power blazer and wedge heels, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Her blonde bob bounced with fury. One of the workers took a step back, holding a tape measure like it might offer protection. Karen Dillman had arrived. Before Nick could reach the porch, Karen was already in full assault mode. She jabbed a manicured finger at the half-assembled fence and barked at the bewildered crew. "This is a clear violation of Section 4. Article 9. Changes to exterior appearances must be approved by the HOA board before any construction begins." The workers looked at each other, then at Nick, who'd now appeared with coffee in one hand, confusion in the other. "Morning," he said carefully. "Can I help you?" Karen turned, visibly annoyed that she now had to explain herself. "You certainly can help by halting this illegal construction immediately. You didn't submit this fence design for review, and it does not match the approved community-style guidelines." Nick raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I'm not in your community. I'm not part of your HOA." Her eyes narrowed. "That's where you're wrong. Your property is visually integrated into Silver Creek Meadows. It's part of the aesthetic landscape. That makes you subject to shared governance under implied community doctrine. Implied what? Nick blinked. Look, I'm not under your jurisdiction. I've got city permits, plot documents, even aerial surveys. You don't own any part of my land. Karen smiled tightly, the kind of smile that made men twice Nick's size back away slowly. You may think that, but you're wrong. And if you keep building, I will file for injunctive relief, property injunction, and civil penalties. Do you understand what that means? Before Nick could answer, one of the workers stepped forward nervously. Sir, I don't want to be involved in any legal disputes. Maybe we should pause? Karen crossed her arms, victorious. Smart man. You don't want to get dragged into a lawsuit. It won't end well for anyone. Nick inhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. You're trespassing, Karen. Get off my land. Oh! She gasped, clutching her pearls, real or otherwise, with theatrical offense. You're threatening me? This is harassment. This is aggression. And just like that, she reached into her bag, pulled out a pink pepper spray canister, and blasted him across the face before sprinting back to her Mazda like a squirrel fleeing a leaf blower. Eyes burning, Nick stumbled back toward the house, coffee spilled, ego bruised, and vision temporarily compromised. Through the blur, he heard Karen yell from her car. I warned you. This is your last chance. And then she was gone. Nick washed out his eyes at the kitchen sink, dried his face with a towel, and walked back outside. He looked at the startled crew, who had frozen mid-task. His voice was low but steady. Keep building. She's not going to win. And somewhere, deep in the HOA war room, Karen was already drafting her next move. By the end of the week, the paperwork arrived. Thick, officious, and unnecessarily dramatic. Karen had filed a civil suit claiming assault, emotional distress, and willful intimidation with intent to cause fear. The attached affidavit read like a soap opera script. The defendant advanced toward me with raised voice and aggressive posture. Fearing for my safety, I was forced to deploy non-lethal defense measures. Nick read the statement aloud to his attorney, a grizzled man named Dan Clevenger, who'd seen more HOA drama than most therapists. She maced me after trespassing, Nick muttered. I didn't even raise my voice until she started flinging legal, like, candy at a parade. Dan chuckled. You've got camera footage? Multiple angles. She sprayed me before I took one step toward her. Good, Dan said. Then this'll be easier than Sunday fishing. Court day came fast. Karen arrived flanked by a local HOA lawyer and a full face of theatrical sorrow. She wore black, possibly mourning the aesthetic harmony she believed Nick had destroyed. In the courtroom, she sobbed gently while describing her trauma. He's a large man, Your Honor. Former military. He lunged at me and shouted profanities. I was terrified for my life. Nick, sitting quietly with an ice pack in his bag and legal documents in hand, gave the judge a tired glance. Then, Dan wheeled out the footage. The room fell silent as the video played. Karen stepping onto the property, yelling, ignoring multiple requests to leave, and finally, with zero provocation, giving Nick a full face of pepper spray. Her aim, to be fair, was impressive. The judge, a woman in her 60s with the expression of someone who'd once taught middle school, looked unimpressed. Ms. Dillman, she said sharply, this footage contradicts your entire statement. Karen tried to recover, but her floundering only made things worse. The workers' testimonies sealed it. The gavel came down hard. The plaintiff's claims are without merit. Mr. Bauer is awarded $15,000 in damages. A restraining order is granted barring Ms. Dillman from approaching within 100 yards of his property. Karen turned crimson, then ghost white. Her lawyer quietly packed up his briefcase. Nick stood, nodded once, and walked out of the courtroom, hoping this would be the end. It wasn't, not even close. For a few blissful days, Nick believed the storm had passed. The fence was nearly finished. The sun was shining, and Karen was legally leashed with a restraining order. He grilled a celebratory steak, tossed a bone to Rex, and allowed himself to exhale. Then the letter started. At first it was just one. A thin envelope in HOA-branded stationery, slipped into his mailbox with no stamp. Courtesy notice. Your fence violates Article 17, Section D. Acceptable color palettes for perimeter structures. Nick chuckled, fed it to the fire pit, and thought nothing of it. But the next day, there were 3 more. Notice of disruption. Your wood treatment is reflective under certain lighting conditions. Community aesthetic infraction. Fence posts are non-uniform in width. Potential safety hazard. Gate swing direction inconsistent with HOA recommendations. Nick stood in front of his mailbox, holding the stack with raised eyebrows. Are they just making these up as they go? Spoiler alert, yes. Within a week, he was receiving daily correspondence. At one point, a 4-page packet arrived with diagrams annotated in red marker. Someone had apparently taken the time to measure the curvature of his fence rails using Google Earth and a protractor. One notice accused him of creating emotional discomfort in adjacent households through unauthorized visual alterations. Then came the mailbox swap. One morning, Nick walked out to find his sturdy iron mailbox had been replaced with a regulation issue white plastic one, complete with a sticker reading Silver Creek Meadows, Parcel 73. He stared at it in silence. Rex peed on it immediately, like an art critic responding to modern sculpture. He installed security cameras that same day. But Karen, even from afar, wasn't done. The HOA began hosting community awareness sessions, where concerned residents were warned about outliers who threaten unity. At one, a slide presentation included a blurry zoom-in of Nick's porch under the heading Non-Compliant Behavioral Patterns. His name wasn't used directly, but everyone knew. A passive-aggressive HOA newsletter followed, featuring a column titled, When One Fence Divides Many, A Community in Crisis. Neighbors began crossing the street to avoid small talk. One teen posted a TikTok calling Nick's house the Fortress of Doom. Nick's favorite part? Someone anonymously dropped off a pamphlet titled Submission, The Path to Neighborhood Harmony. It was printed in Comic Sans and smelled faintly of lavender. Still, he didn't cave. Not even close. Instead, he posted a new sign on his property line. Private property, not governed by HOA. Trespassers will be blessed with legal action. And behind it, the fence stood tall and proud. The HOA, however, had only just begun its dirty war. It was 3:12 a.m. when Nick was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. At first he thought he was dreaming, maybe a leftover echo from an old Navy deployment. But then Rex let out a low, guttural growl from the foot of the bed. Ears perked and nose pointed toward the window. Another crack, this time louder, closer. Nick swung his legs over the bed, still half-dazed, and grabbed the pneumatic rifle he kept mounted beside the back door, a precaution he'd installed more out of principle than paranoia. But in this neighborhood, principles tended to pay off. The moment he stepped out onto the porch, the chill slapped him awake. What he saw next froze him in place. Two shadowy figures in hoodies and masks were pounding at his fence with a sledgehammer and a crowbar, like they were auditioning for some kind of low-budget demolition derby. It wasn't random vandalism. They weren't tagging or running. They were targeting. Nick raised the rifle, took a breath, and fired a single non-lethal shot. The sharp pop echoed through the night. One of the figures dropped instantly with a yelp, clutching his leg. The other bolted toward the road, hopping over a drainage ditch like a gazelle on Red Bull. Nick didn't pursue. Instead, he flipped on the backyard floodlights, called 911, and walked slowly toward the fallen man, who was now whimpering something about just following orders. Rex, ever the loyal sentinel, stayed 2 steps behind with his teeth bared, but silent. Police arrived within minutes. The suspect was handcuffed and taken into custody, and the damaged section of fence, 2 slats, a split post, was photographed and documented. Nick gave his statement, handed over the security footage, and went back inside to make coffee. He didn't bother going back to sleep. The next morning, the pieces fell together faster than a bad soap opera. The injured vandal, taken to the ER for a deep pneumatic bruise to the thigh, turned out to be Jeffrey Dillman. That's right, Karen's husband. The man who'd once passed Nick on the street and waved like they were distant relatives at a cookout had been the one trying to bring his fence down under cover of night. Worse, or perhaps better, depending on your appetite for chaos. The second masked figure, the one who ran, was identified days later through security footage enhancements and a very unlucky vanity plate. Karen's sister Lisa. The Dillman family tree, apparently, bore rotten fruit across several branches. The police report confirmed that the two had conspired to disable and partially dismantle Nick's property to encourage voluntary compliance with community standards. There were even text messages. One of them read, "Once it's broken, he'll have no choice but to tear it all down. HOA will win." Spoiler, they didn't. Nick filed for aggravated trespassing, conspiracy to destroy private property, and violation of the restraining order. The court date was set almost immediately, thanks in no small part to the public attention the case was now getting. Local news crews camped out at the edge of Silver Creek Meadows for exclusive shots of the now infamous fence war. Nick couldn't walk into a hardware store without someone nodding in his direction and saying, "Hey, you're the fence guy, right?" He'd nod politely. The one and only. Karen, meanwhile, had gone from feared figurehead to neighborhood punchline. She stopped attending HOA meetings in person, appearing only via blurry Zoom calls with books strategically stacked behind her labeled Civic Leadership and How to Build Community Trust. But it was too late, because now the community wanted justice. And Nick wanted something more satisfying than justice. He wanted consequences. The courtroom was packed. Even the bailiff looked mildly annoyed at the overflow crowd. Residents, reporters, bloggers, and at least one podcaster who whispered dramatic narrations into a fuzzy mic hidden inside a fake Yeti tumbler. Local news outlets had dubbed it the fence trial. One headline read, "Veteran versus HOA, Colorado's most petty war. Goes federal, sort of." Nick sat at the plaintiff's table, calm, collected, and dressed in his cleanest flannel. His lawyer, Dan Clevenger, had upgraded to a 3-piece suit for the occasion. The opposition? Karen and Jeffrey Dillman, side by side, dressed like they were auditioning for a Hallmark special called The Persecuted Neighbors. Their lawyer, a slick young man with an aggressive haircut and an ego that probably charged rent, looked fresh out of law school and armed with buzzwords. The judge, none other than the legendary Joan M. Blake, took her seat with the kind of slow, deliberate presence that made everyone sit up straighter. She peered over her glasses and gave the room a look that could have silenced a marching band. Dan opened the case with a bang. Literally. He dropped a large binder full of HOA notices, incident reports, and color-coded fence diagrams onto the evidence table with the satisfying thud of justice. "Your Honor," he said, "what began as a peaceful home improvement has become a relentless, coordinated campaign of harassment, vandalism, and unlawful aggression, all to enforce rules that do not and never did apply to my client." Then came the footage. Nick's home security cameras were a gift from the storytelling gods. The courtroom watched in fascinated silence as Karen trespassed and pepper-sprayed a man holding a cup of coffee, only to retreat like a pantomime villain into the shadows. Next came the night footage. 2 masked figures bashing the fence, one of whom was clearly identified in the hospital the next morning, still clutching his thigh. The pièce de résistance? A printed transcript of Karen and Jeffrey's text messages, obtained via subpoena. "He'll fold. He doesn't have the stamina for HOA politics. Once we hit the North Post, it'll collapse. Just aim low." "This is for the good of the neighborhood." Karen, who had up to this point looked mildly sedated, leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something frantic. He stood and objected, citing emotional bias and contextual distortion. Judge Blake gave him a look so sharp it could file granite. "Overruled. Sit down." Jeffrey tried to make his case, blubbering something about aesthetic values and unwritten expectations of community cohesion. Dan simply handed him a laminated copy of Nick's property deed with no mention of HOA jurisdiction and let the silence do the talking. Then Karen took the stand. For a brief moment, the courtroom held its breath. This was the queen bee of Silver Creek Meadows, and everyone wanted to see her sting herself. She did not disappoint. Karen declared that her actions were preventative civic leadership, that Nick's antisocial modifications to his property posed a visual and emotional burden to her community, and that she regretted nothing because someone has to set a standard. When asked by Dan if she regretted ordering a late-night fence demolition, she replied, "Technically, I only encouraged structural reevaluation." When asked if she recognized that trespassing on private land was illegal, she said, "Not if it's for the greater aesthetic good." Judge Blake sighed, took off her glasses, and looked down at her notes. "Ms. Dillman, are you seriously suggesting that damaging someone's fence with a sledgehammer at 3 a.m. is beautification?" Karen blinked. "Contextually, yes." The courtroom laughed. Even the stenographer snorted. The verdict didn't take long. The Dillmans were found guilty of conspiracy to commit vandalism, violation of a restraining order, trespassing, harassment, and defamation. The HOA, who had tried to distance themselves with a pitiful statement about overreach by individual members, was found negligent for enabling Karen's reign of terror through inaction and implicit support. Nick was awarded $150,000 in damages, plus all legal fees. The court further ruled that any future contact by Karen or Jeffrey with Nick or his property would result in immediate jail time. Judge Blake concluded with a final note. "Let this be a reminder to HOAs everywhere. The rules don't apply to everyone just because you wish they did. The law is not an accessory to your aesthetic ambitions." The gavel hit the block like a gunshot. Karen stared ahead, stunned. Jeffrey rubbed his temple like he'd just learned gravity was a hoax. Nick, for his part, didn't gloat. He simply stood, thanked the judge, and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, reporters shouted questions. One asked if he had anything to say to Silver Creek Meadows. Nick paused, looked directly into the camera, and said, "Build a better fence next time, preferably on your own damn property." Mick dropped. A month after the trial, Silver Creek Meadows was quieter than it had been in years. Not because things had settled, but because Karen's absence left a vacuum no one dared fill. Her lawn grew wild. Her once immaculate porch sat empty, save for a wilting seasonal wreath that now read, "Welcome," because the E had fallen off. Jeffrey was spotted just once, attempting to edge trim the grass in socks, looking like a man who'd seen too much and aged 20 years in a single court verdict. Nick, meanwhile, had other plans. He had spent the last few weeks rebuilding the damaged section of his fence with fresh lumber and a touch of flair. He'd added iron hinges, a custom-carved gate handle in the shape of a grizzly bear, and, his personal favorite, a handmade wooden plaque that read, "This fence cost the HOA $165,000. Please enjoy responsibly." Then came the invitations. On a bright Saturday morning, dozens of envelopes were hand-delivered to every mailbox in the neighborhood, even the ones that had previously been used to stuff HOA citations into his. Each was sealed with wax because Nick had flair, and inside was a simple note. Open Fence Day. Good fences make good neighbors. Come enjoy a cold drink, a hot burger, and a story you won't forget. By 4 p.m., the lawn was packed. Families brought lawn chairs, kids ran around with bubble wands, and Rex, freshly bathed and wearing a bow tie collar, roamed like a fuzzy ambassador of peace. A few neighbors, previously loyal to Karen, arrived sheepishly and offered baked goods as tokens of reconciliation. Nick accepted them all with a smile and a nod. No grudges today. A folding table was set up under a tent with a sign, "Fence Facts. Ask me anything." Next to it was a display of laminated HOA notices, a copy of the court verdict, and a little red button labeled, "Press to hear Karen scream aesthetic violation." Spoiler. It was a voice memo recorded during one of her past tantrums. It played on loop. Nick stood by the grill flipping burgers like a man who'd earned the right to cook in peace. When someone asked him if he planned to run for HOA president, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped a bratwurst. "Nope," he said. "I believe in freedom, not forms." Later, as the sun dipped low and golden light spilled across his yard, Nick picked up a cold beer, climbed onto a makeshift podium, a tree stump with dignity, and cleared his throat. "Neighbors," he said. "This fence? It was never just about wood, or bylaws, or whose bush is 3 inches too wide. It was about boundaries, about the right to live without someone weaponizing community spirit to control your front porch. We live here, not under anyone's thumb. And today, this barbecue is proof that we can respect each other's space and still come together." Applause followed. Honest, hearty applause. As evening fell, solar string lights twinkled along the new fence, casting a soft glow over laughter, chatter, and the smell of grilled onions. Kids played tag, adults swapped stories, and for the first time in years, Silver Creek Meadows felt like a real neighborhood again. At the edge of the crowd, a familiar figure lingered in the shadows near a parked sedan. Karen. No blazer, no clipboard, just a woman in oversized sunglasses, watching from a distance. She clutched something in her hands. Maybe another letter. Maybe nothing. Nick noticed. He raised his beer subtly, not in welcome, not in challenge, just acknowledgement. She hesitated, then nodded once and stepped back into the car. She didn't stay. The next morning, her house had a for sale sign out front. The listing said, "Charming property, HOA adjacent, quiet neighbors, fenced view." Back at Nick's place, the sign on his gate stayed lit all night. Private property, proudly, HOA free. And so it ended. Not with gavel cracks or screaming matches, but with grilled burgers, soft laughter, and a fence that stood tall, as fences should.